West Asia continue to escalate even as talks for a ceasefire continue. Reports suggest that Israel-Hamas conflict, which has now entered 110th day, may see an agreement on a 30-day ceasefire in Gaza being reached soon. But experts point out that there is still a lot of ground to cover as far as fighting in the Gaza Strip continues. Now, the Red Sea continues to be on red alert. The U.S. military has carried out 2 more strikes in Yemen, claiming to have destroyed 2 Houthi anti-ship missiles aimed at the Red Sea. The pressure on this key maritime route has deepened. There were also tit-for-tat aerial attacks by Iran and Pakistan on each other's soil, causing worry of a widening regional conflict. So where does this leave the state of energy security in this situation? Also, how badly is the supply chain being impacted? Joining us now to take us through that is Gaurav Ganguly, Senior Director of Economic Research at Moodys Analytics. Gaurav, many thanks for joining us here on CNBC-TV18. Take us through the key pressure points at this point on the back of the attacks that we are seeing and the impact on supply chain disruption and how large that is already.
Thank you for having me on the show, Shereen. So I guess the first point to make is that the Red Sea is seeing a reduced volume of traffic flowing through it as a result of the attacks around the Gulf of Aden and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. But the Suez Canal is not closed for business, and this is quite important. The volume of shipping that goes through the Suez Canal has, however, declined. So compared to a year ago, the volume of shipping that is currently transiting the Suez is roughly halved. And the remainder of the traffic, and this is primarily traffic from Asia to Europe and back, that's having to go via a longer route around the southern tip of Africa. And depending on whether we're talking about a bulk carrier or a container ship, the bulk carriers have a lower speed, have a slower speed. The additional journey time can be between 8 and 18 days. So clearly this is adding some friction to the global economy at a time the global economy requires less of that sort of stuff. Now, how much is that actually affecting supply chains and the global economy through things such as impacted industrial production or inflation? Well, the answer for now is not that much, and that's good news. We've heard of disruptions in automotive production in Europe. We've heard of high-profile cases such as Tesla and Volvo calling for pauses in production. We've heard of retailers talking about shortages, but what we're not seeing right now is a massive increase in costs and a breakdown in supply chains. We're just seeing some stretching of these supply chains. So the overall story for now is that industrial production, at least in Europe, is likely to take a little bit of a hit in the next few months. Same thing could happen in parts of Asia. Supply chains will face difficulties, but shipping will continue and we'll have to try and normalize. So that means things like longer shipping times, companies having to think about their inventory situation, having to deal with higher costs, etc. But overall, we think that this kind of a situation, as long as it remains contained, will not have a huge impact on the global economy.
Gaurav, you're right in pointing out that the impact so far has been limited. But were this to continue for the next few months, and we don't have any indication of hostilities abating at this point in time, are you factoring in, for instance, if this were to go on for the next 6 months or through 2024, specifically as far as inflation is concerned? Because on some routes, we have seen a doubling, in fact, of freight costs. So, the impact, at least on inflation, on costs, what could that potentially mean?
It's a good point that if the longer this continues, the more likely we are to see a significant impact on prices, for instance. We're right now assuming that a lot of this sorts itself out by the end of the first quarter or perhaps sometime in the second quarter. But if it continues over a period of 1 year, for instance, then we are looking at a slightly different scenario. But that said, we should take in mind that shipping costs account for a pretty small fraction of total goods costs. So provided shipping costs don't continue to escalate and get to the point that we saw perhaps back in 2021 during the pandemic, which was a very special case, provided we don't get to that kind of a situation, it will still have a very small impact on inflation. If I give you the example of Europe, European inflation is coming down. In the Eurozone, which was very heavily impacted by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the fact that price growth is slowing and inflation is coming down reflects the normalization that's occurred over the course of 2023. Now, inflation should get close to target by the end of this year. If we see this current situation persist for the next 6 months, and if freight prices remain where they are, that's still not going to have a material impact on European inflation.
Well, that is good news, and that's good to hear. And our hope certainly is that this is going to be contained and will not result in a protracted series of events in the Red Sea. Gaurav Ganguly, always a pleasure. Many thanks for joining us here on CNBC-TV18. That's Moody's analytics with the impact of the attacks currently on in the Red Sea on global trade and shipping specifically. That is it on this edition of Business 360. Do stay tuned. A lot more coming up right after this short break. We're back in a moment.